Thanks everybody for coming. I might, yes it works, traditional slide about myself. I work in product in Wolt. I take care of the teams that work with Courier and merchant products there. I'm Ukrainian, now work in Helsinki, which is the main engineering office for Wolt. I like talking to the customers. That's why I'm going to talk to you about it. Before working in Wolt, I spent a few years in TransferWise, which is kind of a big, I guess, in Baltics. And before that, I was in Uber, which is also, I guess, close to my work, gig economics right now. But yeah, I work in product companies. I work in companies that scale up, that are super chaotic, and probably a lot of what I'm going to mention here is not the theory of what we usually learn during, how UX design is done, which is really great. But it's a lot about like how to hustle when you have less people than things you need to do. Well, super easy to talk about it here because you have it. You have the couriers in the street. We have an awesome office here with awesome people. I don't know if you guys are hiring. They're here. Probably they are. It's a food delivery company. That's our main focus. We're in 20 countries, growing every month. This slide from last year, we probably have a few countries missing here. A few islands as well, I think, are missing. Cyprus. We have around 100 people in engineering product analytics. Out of them, 10 are kind of product people and stuff around. I work in products that I can call skin in the game products. It's essentially products which are not 5 minutes weekly average daily usage. The couriers who rely partially on their income from Wolt can work for several hours average daily. That's our average daily usage. And it's super important to build products for them, to build products that they understand, that they know, and that they actually find useful. Same thing with the restaurants. Every daily usage is like 12 hours, I don't know, restaurants, it depends. Also very different because you have different kind of use cases here when you have an employee, when you have a restaurant owner, when you have a lot of idle time, potentially, depending on the restaurant, when this iPad sits there without doing anything. But that's kind of briefly on the products. Again, the important stuff, it's super important to build them for the users, and that's what I'm going to talk today about. Things that probably for most of us are like so obvious, but actually when you come to the world of actual product development, like people don't do it 100%, never, well, from my experience at least. So yeah, I hope you're going to learn a bit about what we do. I'm going to talk about why I think this is super important, the customer feedback section, how we do it in Wolt. Again, my learnings from companies that are super focused on customers. And again, this is probably biased from my experience on customer-focused company. I never worked in B2B, for example. Typical misconception about that, and I hope you have questions. Yeah, customers, why? And first slide, no. Yes, a personal story, 2009, me and my best friend working on creating some iOS apps. This is the times when iOS apps were not like hundreds of millions of apps, much less of them. We were building a game, some traction, thousands of downloads, which is not much at all, as you can imagine, for an app. We love our app, we use it all the time, we think it's perfect, we built all the things, like all these cool different combinations. We never talk to our users because that was not something we thought we need to do. And then we closed it down, and somehow we got to talk to a few of them in the end, and we realized that we were building something for ourselves that's completely off what they wanted, right? They didn't want all the combinations, all the difficulty levels, it was too complicated. They wanted an easy way to get on board and understand what we're about and got a good app, right? And that was my first misconception that, wow, we actually failed to get to know the customers, which completely failed our company. We were students. And if you look actually at the stats data, probably biased data, but the reasons the companies fail are no market need, and no market need means no customer need, right? In a customer-facing product especially. So you don't really understand what the customers need. You don't really build for them. And I would argue that this kind of leads to not knowing your customer and maybe not talking to them enough, right? There's probably the data side. But that's what I'm going to talk today about. And if you look at, oh yeah, this is example. I like Google, a company that held all the resources, all the people, all the smartest guys. Like there's so many startups that like didn't fly from there, or the companies they bought and killed. like the reasoning here, clearly not cost, right? And then if you look at why companies succeed, and I'll mention actually, I'll mention this about who of you do know what's NPS, Net Promoter Score. Okay, who of you use it regularly? Awesome. There's few. Yes, I have a speaker that also loves it. Yes, NPS is great. It's not ideal, but that's the thing, right? Something I'm going to talk about as well. Don't be perfectionist. Don't think that the metric is not needed because it's not perfect. And what this metric means is Net Promoter Score is essentially how likely your users are going to recommend your product, right? When you get the survey, please on this scale of 0 to 10, tell us how much you would recommend to use Wolt to your friends and family or whatever. And from this, you kind of create a number from -100 to 100 that tells you how much your users love you or like you and can recommend you. So it's kind of correlated. Again, not ideal, but an awesome metric that I highly recommend you to use. And if you look at the companies, and this is trillion-dollar companies, tech companies, this is very high NPS. Like, it doesn't need to be 100, right? If you look at Google, it's a bit complicated. They have many products like Google Maps, Google Gmail. It's hard to say. But users really love the products. Like, they really love the products. And if you look at some other ones, like Tesla, I mean, you know what happens with the stock, right? Like, people who own a Tesla freaking love Tesla and recommend it so much. Another example, I use my ex-employee, TransferWise 76. When the market for them is, in banks, for example, is -27. So they're coming to a market, they're disrupting the market, they get people to love them, they get 70% of their growth from word of mouth because they actually solve a customer problem. They know their customers very well, right? An interesting part there from stats as well that you can read more about, it's all obviously public information, that customers who recommend you at 7 when you answer this like survey, when they move to 8, they tell twice more people about you. And then when you move them to 9, they tell even twice more people about it, right? And I'm sure it's the same with the negative, right? If users hate your product, don't like it, just need to use it, they probably tell people about how shitty it is. I had pretty bad experience with Air Baltic this week, and we were talking with colleagues, and we were like, "Oh, I'm never going to use it again." And that's exactly the thing, right? Like, people who love your product, who you really try to understand, and that's why many airlines, for example, now send you a survey, how was your flight, right? They try to get their customers' problems and solve all these pain points they don't know. Mentioning Wolt, we also have a high NPS. It's 50 plus, it's not satisfactory for us, move it better. For Courier side, I can say that it's even higher because we are trying to be a different company. In Wolt, we are trying to do things differently from the industry. We are trying to be a partner for couriers, restaurants, and I really take this very seriously. So we also have quite a high level, but we're always trying to improve. And why all this kind of combination of stories of companies fail? Because I think that talking to the customers is actually what gets you to succeed in all of those, right? You need to understand the market, so the market needs, remember why the company's failure. You need to make something people want, right? Talk to the customers, figure out the problem, make what they want. Figure out how to validate the problem, right? Also by talking to them, UX research. We have an awesome talk later about more on that side. And build really product that can solve the problems, and so that's how you're gonna scale. I think that's at least how nowadays all the successful companies that people love scale. There's other many things about it. For example, customer empathy. If you want to build a culture in your team, I'll mention this a bit later, it's super important to talk to the customers, to make your teams meet the customers and things like that. And you can always find new ideas, edge cases from all the conversations that you will have. And as somebody who works in product, I think the one of the most important thing, if not most important, for me, I think is most important for the product role, if there's product manager, product leads, product owners, project manager around, I think that understanding the customer is, even though one of 100 things you do, is the most important thing. And I would encourage you to do it more, because sometimes you kind of get into the routine and don't do it enough. Yes, so how do we do it at Wolt? The company I hope you use. First part is about being the customer. And the thing there is, like, sometimes you think about being the customer a bit differently. For example, in Wolt, the customer is not only the person who orders food, right? Like probably you guys here in the room. There's many sides, right? For example, I used to work more on the courier side at first when I joined. And we used to have the thing, delivery days, when we all once went and do deliveries whoever wanted. Like from any team, you would go do a half of Friday doing food deliveries, understanding the customer problems, and in that case, customer would be the courier, right? In the same way, why not do the same with the restaurants, right? Like try to go and understand the pain points. We are not still doing the food preparation yet, it's coming. But essentially trying to get to know your users. And again, if you think about users, try to go into their kind of comfort zone when they usually use your product, right? Don't always only invite them to the office and things like that. Same thing with support. For example, in our company, we have many teams and many tools we're building. If you're building tools for support, and even if you're working close to them, it's super important to understand how they work. Didn't find a great photo, but from last Friday, the guys went and fixed the problem within an hour for what support was facing, you know, and nobody probably mentioned because it wasn't big. It maybe wasn't worth of engineering 1 hour time in terms of organization, but it's awesome to have these initiatives and how they scale. It's really gonna improve your organization's empathy towards all sides of the business. And I'll mention this as well a bit later about and yeah, this is quite the obvious one. This is what we usually associate with like being the user, right? The consumer side, the one who is actually doing the food deliveries. Like for example, we have this new feature called group order. Essentially, it's good for offices, right? When you have a group ordering together all the time and figuring the bugs. There's a lot of bugs. Hopefully not anymore. It's live for everybody. But that's essentially the part about being the user of your product. And again, it doesn't need to stop here, right? You have all of you probably work in an organization with many stakeholders. Try to understand each of their pain problems if you really want to build the empathy in your organization and do all those initiatives. It's going to help immensely, I can guarantee you. Another one, quite obvious one as well, talk to your customers whenever you can. When you travel, this is a picture from Baku a few months ago, went with a team, tried to meet couriers for lunch. It was a funny one because this one was with translation. Usually you just try to get along with English if you go to Denmark or Tallinn. There it was like somebody was translating for Azeri, but everybody had an awesome experience because you still learn the things you would never learn in the office sitting down, right? And you can do it in many contexts. Anywhere you travel, try to meet somebody new. Same with the beta groups, right? You can, if you get like some WhatsApp group, for example, we have like 10 couriers, mostly in Helsinki because it's just a bit easier. You'll find bugs, you can test things, like try to be involved in different channels where you can actually get the feedback, not necessarily through somebody, you know, posting an angry email or something in the Facebook group. We have also a feature I love. We should do it in our restaurants. I hope we can do it soon. But we have now it in the courier. Whenever you log off, your day is over, you post your feedback, it goes to a Slack channel. Slack channel that actually a lot of people read, right? And you would be surprised as a courier, like when I tell some of the couriers that we have that everybody's like, what? Like everybody in Wolt can read what I tell them about, right? And we always find a lot of things quite quickly, especially when the release happens, like some bugs and some things. Try to get this feedback loop going. And again, a lot of companies are doing it, obviously. Not obvious for everybody, 100%. User research feedback groups. Yeah, we're going to talk about it a bit more soon. The idea is, again, your users are biased. That's kind of the misconception you have. Probably even more biased for many reasons. But when talking to more, you're probably going to realize more and more problems, right? And bias will always go down as well. One thing about talking to the users, highly recommend this book or watch some video about it. The idea is when you talk to the users, try to put your conversation script around the fact that, you know, don't ask for confirmation, because as you would be asking your mom would always say, like, it's an awesome product, awesome idea, son, like, I would definitely invest. Try to tweak around the problems people are facing. So yeah, highly recommend the book before going. And another book, and we'll talk about user validation as well, Sprint by Google Ventures. There's actually videos in YouTube that also kind of replace the book in a way. Millennials, we like videos. And the idea is like try to get the team, put them into the room, and validate the problem. Something that you probably would not put there on the roadmap usually, because it's like huge investment to get like 8 people in the room for a week. But it's really useful if you want to solve a problem that you think otherwise would take 3 months, but you're not sure if it's worth it. Put them in the room for a week, and on Friday talk to actual users about it. And it's a great thing. Highly recommend the book Sprint. We also like to involve this kind of short trips hackathon. Actually came from Poland yesterday evening, had a similar one. Take a team, get a small problem, go for 2 days, try to validate it. Getting out of comfort zone helps a lot for the team to really focus on a problem, right? And from your daily routine of, coming to the office, posting your stand-up notes, going to some meetings and things like that. Get creative. Like this really helps also with like quick validation, and then exactly testing with the users in the end. Like that's an obvious, by the way, for each of those. In the end, you would probably go and try to talk to people, show them maybe prototypes. Another thing we like to do as well is creating stories that really, really, really get the empathy going for the organization and for outside. I have 2 examples. One example about a restaurant, and I don't even know if the story is true, but essentially I think it's true because, it was in Air Baltic magazine. I read it also yesterday, so maybe it's true. You come to a place and they tell you about how they love Wolt, and they would go bankrupt without Wolt. And this discussion happening with like within Wolt people. So you would come and have you heard about this restaurant, right? And I don't even know if the story is true, but it creates a great empathy within the organization that, like you're actually doing a great thing for the users, and same for the couriers, right? We have this monthly where we try to get somebody. I was interviewing this young lady in Poland this week, and in our monthly include some information about, your users, like share a story about somebody who is working, in Tallinn or Baku, and how they interact with your product, what they like about it, what they don't like. We always ask, what would you improve about experience? And when you do this, you will involve your teams and organization in this and build this culture, right? Culture of customer feedback, of user feedback, and talking to the users. Do this. This should be a job for everybody in the team, not only a product manager or UX researcher, designer. Like this is the team's job. One caveat: data is still important. We still use all of those NPS retention. We have like different ratings or happiness metrics. It doesn't need to replace something, right? You're still doing both, but data is a very different thing from user feedback because, and this kind of comes to the misconception. I wonder if the first one was here. Okay, I'll mention the one about data. No. I should have changed the slides. This is not data, right? What we talked about. This is something I hear a lot. Like, why do we need to do it? We have all the data, right? And that's the idea. Like this user discussion, user feedback session should never replace the data. It should always be done together with them. And yeah, we kind of not smoothly really, switch to the misconceptions about all this topic. And one of them, for example, we are all the users, right? So I actually mentioned that. So there's always both 2 sides, as you can imagine. We know ourselves what the product should be, right? And that kind of gets me to my first story about us building the product for ourselves and thinking that that's a user problem because it's our problem, right? And the idea is like you're not a random sample. You have all these confirmation biases that you have all the other hundreds of biases of not knowing the biases, and all the things that like you should still do it because like the fact that it's biased doesn't mean you shouldn't kind of not do things, but don't ignore the biases. I know maybe it didn't make sense in the end, but anyways. Another common misconception: customers don't know what they want. But the idea is that customers actually know their problems very well often. And you are talking to them to understand the problem, not necessarily the like the final stage of solution. The customer is not going to come to you and say, I want this. What you should be doing is you should be asking, like, what are you trying to achieve? What problem are you trying to solve, right? The thing from product managers, if you work in product organization, a product manager would probably come like, what are you trying to do with this ticket, you know? This is super important for this part of the story. For example, what I'm hearing a lot as well about the previous one, you know, Steve Jobs, who is considered obviously like in product management quite a famous guy. He didn't listen to the customers, but actually, if you read a lot more about it, there's a lot of videos how Jobs explains how crucial it is to talk to them, right? And again, not understanding what they want to build, but understanding the problem. So try to, like, if you're interested, try to Google it. It's quite interesting and cool. Another I think, thing that I hear, doesn't scale. How do you scale all this like trips and hackathons? And how do you scale like all the reading every feedback that the courier posts? Well, the thing is, like, you need to get your hands dirty and in the end try to understand the core experience. I really love this podcast. It's from Reid Hoffman, the co-founder, I guess, of LinkedIn, or CEO maybe at some point. He's also Wolt investor. It really talks about how Airbnb became successful with being really flat and not knowing how to grow, and then kind of talking to the users hundreds of times in New York and figuring the core of experience before they started scaling and figuring this. Really highly recommended. We talked about this one. And the last one, I think, for me is like we need all the data. And here I would argue for develop a bias for action. This comes from Amazon, probably not only from Amazon, but essentially the leadership principle is that you can't get all the data, right? There's always going to be a bit of intuition. There's always going to be a bit of, like we're not sure, but we can test and validate, but the validation part is super important, right? Like that's when you kind of do it in steps and don't build the final perfect product and start with something that you can actually, show on the page to a user and test prototype. This was my last slide, and I didn't know what to put in between, so I thought like it would be a smoother ending. Don't be a perfectionist, thing like a lot of us kind of face in product management. Try to solve small problem, focus on it. It's not going to be ideal. Iterate, talk to users more. Thank you. Any questions, you can contact me here. And Masha asked me to put questions from Facebook here. Should we go one by one, or do we got questions from audience first? Facebook, okay. Cool. So question from Marcus. Is Marcus here? So Marcus is asking, preparation work do you do before making a design? I'm going to try to answer questions quickly, by the way. I just mentioned it. Talk to your users. Try to do all the prototyping and validation before you start developing the work. Maybe do a bit of development work if you're in a hackathon. Probably it's going to be 1-2 days. And validate. Don't create perfect products. I don't believe in stealth mode products unless it's like space, I don't know, pharmaceutical or something. So yeah, talk to customers. Soonish decision on product will be not data driven, but rather data informed. Liga. This person here? No. Maybe you'll get a present. We need to give a present for the best question. I actually love this question. It's essentially about my last slide. I believe there's a huge balance between data and feedback. People misuse data a lot. It's super easy to lie with data. Data is awesome at the same time. Data is needed, and it doesn't replace feedback, but in very unlikely cases, data will be really giving you the answer. So there's always going to be this creativity, intuition, especially when AI is taking the world and creativity becomes super important. Data information informing being more creative is super important. So I definitely agree that we never became perfect in data drivenness, but there's going to be less and less of it in the future as well. So maybe we peaked at some point. And the last question, tools for gathering customer feedback in UX research, Google Analytics, CMS. We use a lot in Wolt as one of the independent autonomous teams kind of company. We can use our own tools. So every team uses their own. We have Firebase, we have Google Analytics, we have our custom telemetry in many cases. We have a lot of custom built stuff regarding data deletion. We're very, we're trying not to gather customer data like crazy companies do, and trying to be very cautious about storing it. So we build a lot of tools around that to easily delete and things like that. And we use a lot of data visualization stuff like Looker, awesome company, well, recently bought by Google, so obviously super expensive as well, but it's a good product, Looker. What else do we use? We use custom-made NPS surveys that just send automatically from whatever we use Intercom. So in Intercom you can send emails based on events. That's all questions.
Yeah. Okay. So I have 2 questions. So I think you shared a lot about the process of organizing and customer feedback, but can you also share some actual examples of what happened in Wolt, where you had some sort of an assumption about how the app was supposed to work, and then the feedback sort of changed that process?
Yeah.
That's the first question. The second question is, do you use any optimization tools? Do you experiment with customers, with their conversions or retention?
Yeah, sure. Second question first, so I don't forget. We use a lot of those. We don't optimize for that usually. So we don't go crazy with optimizing conversion and things like that. We focus on retention a lot. We try to understand what makes users unhappy, and if the data is showing this, what are the reasons why users would not be using us, why they're not converting, for example. Asking the users why they're not converting is, I think, one of the most underestimated thing in product development. And we try to go for it. If you think about funnels and stuff, I don't think we do it too much. We are not a bit crazy about that. So we don't. I think it's also because the company is scaling 100% a year. You don't go for incremental changes sometimes, and you try to go 10x. So, but that's a different story. I guess a good problem to have. User feedback session, easy. For example, I don't know if it's I can share. Yeah, I guess I can share the background. So restaurant in Wolt has a very strong flexibility in terms of choosing how long they're going to make your food for. We are much more flexible than some other players, so because we're, again, trying to be a partner. We're trying to be the nice guys. And this creates sometimes interesting biases that you're not sure. Is the restaurant, for example, super busy and cannot make food in, let's say, 15 minutes? Or the UI is not enabling them? And we've been in one of our markets, just, again, this week. And the problem was, do the restaurants actually, have some thoughtful process that they can't make food right now in 20 minutes? Or that psychology driven by UI? And the second was the answer, right? Because we were standing behind the counter, so there was one picture from on the counter, and we were seeing how people are clicking, and we were like, what drove you to click 20 minutes when you actually don't have many clients, right? And the idea was well, UI is kind of in the center of the UI, right? So you just click it. It was awesome. It was really revealing to trying to understand again what is the reason behind particular decision restaurant makes when assessing your food. Of course, sometimes they're busy, but there is a lot of fixes that we're trying to now achieve after that. So that's one example. Yes?
Hey, thank you for your speech, but I noticed that you have lots of sources of the feedback you're getting. So you're going out to customers, you're going to restaurants, you're talking to couriers and WhatsApp. So apparently you're collecting lots of it.
Yes.
The question is actually consisting of a few parts. First of all, how do you structure that? When do you keep that? How do you evaluate that? And how do you prioritize that?
Yes, awesome question. I didn't mention one of the most important things in prioritization, kind of customer stakeholder feedback. So feedback, for example, from countries, from local teams like Team Riga, what do they think about the product? We also do it a lot. And then you essentially get to the road mapping process, right? And how do we do that? essentially you get all the sources, more or less you try to stick to a roadmap and not change it too often, let's say a few months, 2-3 months, you don't change too much, except all the hackathons that you do probably like 10-20% of the time. And you try to focus on the big things, of course, and not focus on the small unless it's super important. And then during the prioritization process, you would gather the team for a significant amount of time, 1-2 days together, to try to structure it, do a lot of prep work on the impact analysis, right? Even if it's super simple, you can make it from like t-shirt sizes, this is XS, this is XL, and the same for the scope it's going to take. Get smart people in the room and try to assess it. Sometimes you can put the number, but again, my experience in the company is that growing like 50 to like say 200% a year, you never will find the perfect number, what's the impact of this feature, right? You will probably not even get to 30% precision. You'll get probably 2x precision, right? This is within like 50,000 euros per year to 200,000. That's kind of the scope. And, a lot of smaller people vote. Potentially somebody may have a higher vote. In Wolt, not really. Kind of everybody, we have democracy. We would vote and try to understand what we feel like is the number one priority for the roadmap and build according to our scope. And again, but leave 20% of time on doing small things, which may be not necessarily the highest impact, but they're important for some users. They're like pain point or anxiety, right? Like you go to Team Riga and they really hate this feature that you made mandatory, right? And hopefully we can fix it. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll try to be loud. So how do you know for which features to gather feedback and for which not?
Why would you not gather feedback for a feature?
Because it would be a waste.
It's
a lot of data you cannot process. Like, let's say this strategic example you mentioned, you're going in as a restaurant, as a food preparation. You would gather feedback from restaurants, but they would say, no, you're actually cannibalizing our partnership with it. This is what you would inevitably receive as feedback. So here you didn't ask them for feedback, you knew it's your decision, you're going this way. So how do you pick when you want feedback for a feature and when you don't?
Well, I guess you always want feedback. The question, this is more a question how to structure noise from other feedback, right? I think you should be gathering all the feedback you can and you want, all the NPS comments, like I'm not gonna lie, there's probably some sources of feedback we don't read as much as we should, right? But that's exactly how you know, right? Like you try to develop the skills that if you have an NPS survey, I'm not gonna read the feedback from 10, most likely, right? I'm gonna read the feedback from 1 or from 4 because I know those users have some pain points that I wanna solve and try to kind of go through it. Same with like the CP feedback channel, right? If I know that the customers are unhappy, I would focus on them, maybe on their feedback more and try to understand what the problem, rather than focusing only on happy customers, right? I think you still should gather everything, but then again, noise management and all the data sources management, it's a different thing, right? And different scale, and that's how the teams, I guess, they structure themselves to focus on a particular problem and kind of gather the feedback around that. And if you have a team that's customer feedback, I'm not gonna read their feedback. So, it's not my thing and not my team, and I don't.